Hi everyone, I'm Angela Goddard, the Director of Griffith University Art Museum, and we are now bringing you the museum from home. I'd like to begin this program by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're gathering here for our programs. This is the Jagera and Turrbal peoples, and also acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and all First Nations people who are joining us. This In Conversation with Debra, Beattie and Jackie Ryan was scheduled to be held on the 26th of March 2020. Now, due to the current circumstances, we've had a slight delay in bringing this to you, but we're thrilled to be able to continue to deliver our public programs virtually. Debra Beattie is a Brisbane-based artist and filmmaker. Her video work, Expo Schmexpo, is included in our current exhibition, Cognitive Dissidents, Reasons to Be Cheerful, curated by Stephen Jones, and it's an insight into early 1980s Brisbane and the looming impact of World Expo 88. Now, Debra is joined by writer and artist Jackie Ryan, whose book We'll Show the World, Expo 88, was published in 2018. So please enjoy this conversation with our guests here today and stay tuned to Griffith University Art Museum's socials for online talks, artist Q&As, sonic incursions and much more. Thank you.
During this time, I saw some adverts for a wonderland, adverts for World Expo 88, and the ads assured me that we were going to show the world. We were going to have this amazing time in Brisbane and Queensland. We're going to rise and assume our natural place in the world power structure. And I remember thinking, oh, that'd be good. So I went to Expo 88 and I had a wonderful time. It was completely guilt-free. And that was probably roughly commensurate with the experiences of a sizable chunk of mainstream Brisbane, I think. It was only later, as part of what I'll call a denumbtification process, that I gained a better understanding of some of the controversies surrounding Expo's originating government. So when I started to look into the story of Expo further, I started speaking with people such as Anne Jones from Cane Toad Times, the protest song Cyclone Hits Expo songwriter Adam Nash, and people who had seen things that I didn't. And one of those, of course, is you, Deb. This is where you came in. So for me, the Deb Beattie experience started with the interview and with watching your amazing film Expo Schmexpo. But I was wondering if you would mind taking us back a little bit further and telling us a little about perhaps the art scene that you were part of and perhaps your own politicization.
Indeed, thanks, Jackie. That was good. Okay, so I guess for me, remembering all of this. Now, remembering also that Expo Schmexpo was actually made in 1984. That's when we shot it all. So, you know, well and truly leading up to the whole event, which, you know, in retrospect, there were lots of great things that happened, you know, and as your subtitle says, Brisbane's almighty struggle for a little bit of cred. You know, it did buoy the city in lots of ways. So, but in 84, we were, yes, coming up with the secret dispute. We were pretty tired of 20 odd years of Bjelke-Petersen, and it's odd remembering it all now because it kind of feels a bit like where we are, you know, with this despotic curtailing of civil liberties for, you know, the police. My son's friend has had her knock on the door from the police yesterday, just making sure you are self-isolating because he's come back from Canada. So there's sort of all these strange reverbs happening when your civil liberties are severely curtailed. We had that combined with an absolute lack of, well, I call it love for the city in terms of the buildings. We'd had Cloudland had been ripped down. The beautiful Bellevue Hotel had been ripped down, and now all we could see was this fabulous riverbank. And from what we could see, it was just being trashed. And we just generally had this feeling that all the things that we loved were being destroyed. So it was a pretty general consternation amongst people in all of the arts. And Brisbane was really different in those days because, you know, the theatre, the film people, acting people, visual arts people. It was a small group, you know, and we all kind of coalesced and were happy to work with each other because it was a kind of a balm against this sort of oppressive atmosphere. So in terms of how Expo Schmexpo came about, one of the things I think I mentioned in our little convos recently was how important it is for me to acknowledge Jerry Connolly in that, because it's really interesting to see people's reactions, and people think that Jerry is reproducing what Joe had said, but Joe said a lot of those kinds of things, you know, like he bumbled and stumbled and used that as a device not to answer a question, but that actual narration is Jerry. That's his wonderful creative take on Joe, you know. So I kind of wanted to make that clear to everybody that that's not Jerry imitating Joe, it's Jerry performing as Joe. Yeah, so that's important, because some people have approached me and asked if, you know, where and when did Joe say that? So that's important to clarify, because I'm a documentary maker now, so notions of what's authentic are important. And then I guess the other tribute that I want to make to that is Christopher Strew, who shot the film, who'd just come back from Berlin. He'd studied at the Berlin Film School. So he had a sensitivity to an aesthetic that saw Brisbane in a way that I kind of did in that sort of, you know, that loving that opening shot of the sandals and the long socks. You know, it was a quirky recognition of things that we weren't making fun. We were actually loving it. And so I want to acknowledge his contribution, and of course the music from dear old Danny Fine. So he's now gone, as many of them are. So that was all important. I've just lost track a little now. Where are we going next?
Well, the theme, Cognitive Dissidents, that plays a little into what you were talking about there. Then the subtitle is Reasons to Be Cheerful. And one of the things that struck me about your film is it's so beautiful. It's such a tribute to the Queensland that, as you say in the book, that you were worried that you knew was being lost. So it's a celebration, but also sort of a period of mourning for it. But in between that, of course, it's also very funny, which of course is again about Jerry Connolly. And what you were saying before, I can understand so easily how people would assume that was Joe, because he captured the spirit of Joe's. It's strange. It's word salad, but in there, of course, Jerry inserts truth. There's truth in all of that, and all of that nonsense about. There's some very hard words in between all of that, and some very callous words about a certain class of Brisbane, and how little Joe cared about it, and all that's in the middle of that word salad. Every now and again, I suppose, like Trump, Joe would let out a truth bomb, almost by accident, but it'd be hidden in the rest of that word salad.
Yes.
Was there much scripting or much of a brief for Jerry, or he just freestyle?
That's the whole thing. That film was completely and utterly unscripted. It was completely financed by me. I was very lucky to have money. I had a full-time job at the education department because, and this is a little ironic side twist, because I don't know if you remember, but Joe didn't want any federal product in our schools. There was to be nothing that had been produced by the Whitlam government to come to Queensland. So we had a huge phalanx of people employed, like me, to produce content for Queensland schools. And Joe knew that they were made by Queenslanders, and they'd be okay. So I had a good income. So that was completely self-funded. I didn't have to have any okays, ticks, boxes, nothing, you know, just me and buying lots of Kodak. And Chris got no money, Jerry got no money, nobody got money in those days. So there was no scripting. We just went around. That was his flat where we shot from, and we just talked about what we wanted to say and what we were feeling, and it was completely improvised, all of it. And the driving around shots were with an old girlfriend's car who had a open roof, so that Chris could stand up in some places like and film from her car. So again, I've lost my track. But before we move on, when you were talking about the importance of seeing beauty amongst the melancholy, I don't know if you'd just let me read. This is from, because I don't know if you know a band called Halfway. Again, this is Johnny Wilsteed, and these are all people who lived through the Joe times. And the little quote is from Ross Gibson. And I just think it's really apt for what we were feeling and what the current conjuncture is. So really, this world should just grind you down. It's tough and it's painful, but somehow instead it lifts you up because it gives you songs, and I would add in here films, from people who have learned how the main chance is really just up to us. It depends on love, and it depends on decency, and being awake when the beauty comes. You have to listen and be awake for the beauty. And I kind of think that's what we were trying to do in our own little way. Like, I'm not very good at anger, and I'm not very good at, but the only way I could survive at that time was to keep looking for the beauty of what I loved and what empowered me in those times. Because they were really dark. I mean, we could reminisce horribly about, gay friends who were beaten to a pulp by the police. This was before homosexuality was legal, Indigenous friends who were beaten to a pulp, like it was a really not nice time. If you're a woman and you got picked up by the police, you could pretty well guarantee they'd have their hand down your pants at some point. It was sexist, it was racist, it was homophobic, it was horrible.
To credit Joe with anything, but so we'd say maybe the one good that came out of it was that the people that were capable of seeing these things, the people with those critical faculties, were the people in a position to craft alternative narratives about it, and to speak out, and to find each other, and to create this thriving and important art scene. So we won't credit Joe with that, we'll credit the people who did it.
In fact, that's kind of not quite true, in the sense that, like, as Luke Roberts reminded me, there was this massive graffiti that said 98% of us artists have left Brisbane. Why the hell haven't you?
Yeah.
And I remember being in Lucky's restaurant one night, and I was talking about whether I should move to Sydney, because it was awful. And the person at the table said, "Oh yeah, go on, just walk away, just leave us, don't stay here and fight the good fight." So there was a lot of tension. It wasn't an easy decision to stay. And in fact, as Luke Roberts said, he left and never came back.
Yeah.
So there was a real tension about, should I stay, should I go? And a lot of the people who were anti-authoritarian at the time moved actually to London, because there was a bigger connect between 80s Thatcher and Brisbane's Joe than there was anybody else. The punks in London knew what was going on a bit more clearly than some of the artists in Sydney and Melbourne. But maybe that's getting away from it. I was also going to mention some of the other films that were happening at the time. And I think you mentioned them too, Pat Fisk's book of a film, Rocking the Foundations. That's a real inspiration to us. And of course, Peter Gray had done Battle for Bowen Hills just before I did mine. So there were, people trying to send out this message to say, let's all pull together, let's work together, let's, establish a sense of we can do this, we can show the world. We can do, but on a different plane, not on a, we can show the world that we're not going to get totally jackbooted by Joe. What else? There's something else I was going to mention, but anyway, you asked me another question, then I'll remember it.
Oh, well, there's certainly merits to both sides. You can certainly understand the Brisbane exodus of artists, and you can certainly understand the ones that stayed and fought. So I certainly wouldn't pick or choose who was right there, but I'm awfully grateful to the ones that stayed and helped chronicle this, and as you say, show the world the other side of things, which of course is part and parcel of Brisbane. I mean, that was the First Nations protesters in the 1982 Commonwealth Games. That was their logo. The world is watching. So Joe doesn't get to have ownership of We'll Show the World. So it's nice that there were so many people banding together to show to shift the camera, shift the focus to, well, we might want to talk about this part here. So it was nice that the people that stayed meant that the history didn't just get to be written by what was looking at that point like the winners, but who were certainly in the more powerful position.
Absolutely. It was 23% of the primary vote. The gerrymander meant that he was actually in with 23% of the primary vote. I mean, it was mad. Anyway.
One time he got in with as little as 19%.
But what else? I was going to mention. It'll come back to me. I've got all these little notes, but I can't. I'm trying to work the right segue to them.
Shall I ask another question while
yes,
you're...
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the films? Actually, during the making of the film, you mentioned earlier traveling around filming locations. Did you have set ones in mind, or were you just, oh my goodness, look at that man, we need to film that? Was a lot of that just as things you came across and wanted to repeat? Absolutely. Like the shot of the guy humping the crane, that was just, we were at Bruce Wolfe's house in Kangaroo Point, and thinking, oh, we should get some nice beautiful shots of the river, and that just happened. He just happened to, with Chris's beautiful eye, he went, oh, look at that, so we grabbed it. So it was real cinema verite in that sense. It was just grabbing what you could. Was and now it seems like such an iconic image of the veranda with the beer bottles and the thongs. Beautiful old Queenslanders.
Yeah, and that was just, going around again to, that's the dear departed Errol O'Neill's house, and just going around and I was watching that with Uncle Bob Anderson, who then did this big reminisce with me about how he was arrested with Errol and, put in the paddy wank. So one little snap of a frame can be incredibly evocative of what was a very intense time. I guess that's why it's got power now, because it's a good film. I don't think it's a great film, but it's a good film. But it is evocative of a time. And Uncle Bob looked at that image and he went, oh, Errol's place, And then Errol's place reminds everybody of what Errol was and how he fitted into the whole narrative, even though I don't actually mention him in the film. So it's it's an interesting process and phenomenal to look back at it now, 35 years later. Wow, it lived.
In between all of those charming shots of socks and sandals and of cats and of old Queenslanders and of that way of life that's past, you also in some of those, in a number of wide shots, have those ominous glimpses of the future. You have those cranes beginning to Joe's favorite thing, cranes on the skyline. So in between, while capturing all of this passing beauty, there's some ominous shots of the things that are threatening that beauty as well, which I imagine was intentional.
And I think also I mentioned in the notes that we sent, because I was reading Eccentric Voices again, the one that you mentioned about Anne Jones, and being reminded of the way the past seeps into the present, all that stuff about the Chanel Theatre. Now, the Chanel Theatre was like my home because it was where I got to see French cinema, the avant-garde, great European films, and also theatre. So it was a real hub of theatre, film, obviously activism. It was on the university. And yes, and what is the fate of the Chanel now, 35 years later? Pull it down. Pull it down. It's like, is there no respect for any kind of cultural history in this place by anybody? Like, we've got a Labor government now. It's like,
stay the same. We had a Labor government demonising protesters too. So things
don't they care? It's. I find it very. But you got to maintain that, keep an eye out for the beauty mantra, because I really want my son and his generation to kind of feel hope and feel like you can maintain the values even when it seems as though we can't.
Well, the global pandemic sure slowed down a lot. A lot. This will be great for our worldwide emissions. So it's really slowed down a lot of construction.
Yeah. Well, no, although down South City Square's still going. That was the other thing I was going to mention too, is about how, when I was talking about the London punks and us, how this film, I think I can't remember whether I mentioned it to you or to Ross, that this film has actually been scooped up by scholars in New York University. Cornell University do a lot of stuff about archiving, and so they've been screening this number of conferences in New York City, because it touches for them a notion of what they call an essay film might look like. And that kind of rang bells for me, because when I was trying to get other things funded at the time with the Australian Film Commission, they were very sort of, we don't fund essay films. So there's no notion of ever getting anything funded like that. And also London. There's been a university in London that have been contacting me. So it's interesting that when you touch on something that's profoundly local, like, you know, that is, I think, a profoundly local evocation of place. But if you do it really authentically, then somehow people in London and New York are embracing it, you know, as they did then and as they do now, 35 years later. So I don't have any explanation for that, but I thought it was me.
That's wonderful, because a lot of what Joe was about was nothing was preserved, and nothing was worth keeping. Everything should be pulled down, so that your film has such a long tail and is getting more visibility as time passes is actually a really nice counter to that, and that's art that did that.
Exactly. Art is the only thing that's going to save us at the moment, I think.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about the more immediate reception of the film. So could you talk us through, once you made it and had it ready to be seen, what happened and what was the response?
Okay, so that was, and that's where all that confusion came about when did you make it exactly. So we shot it in 84, but then all through 85 and we screened it, but you know, always the problem is distribution. You know, this is making a film for cinema in 1985 was, you know, I could show it down at, we had the wonderful, there's another one, the Metro Arts Centre. Let's talk about what's happening there. You know, that wasn't my other home, my second home. And we had a cinema with a 16mm projector. And so I could screen it there, but, you know, to a few mates. So then this new technology came up where we transferred it to video, and my dear friend Stephen Stockwell played around with it. Didn't do much to modify it really, just Jewished it up a bit so it was a video. And then the wonderful, I'll get the name, Jill, Ross can add this in when I can't remember, Jill ran the first National Video Festival. And so we put it into that, and of course then it won first prize in the video art section, and that got a much bigger distribution, because video you could distribute more easily, you know. And now, you know, of course it's getting even more hits because it's on the State Library of Queensland one search online. So, you know, it all changes a lot with the new technologies. But at the time, it was a big hit, of course. It was a big hit in Queensland, in Brisbane, because of its, you know, what it was speaking to us. And then it became a big hit in Sydney, because, again, and it was speaking to them. I mean, I've got to give Sydney people their due too. We did have I think there's one in the Cognitive Dissidents exhibition. I can't remember her name either because I'm getting so old. But, you know, people did come up from Sydney and try to document what was happening. Like Tom Zabricki came up and did Friends and Enemies for the Sequeb strike. And the other woman who's on the opposite wall to where my film is, I don't know, Ross can clarify all this. She came up and she made the one ago, I think it's called Queensland Dossier, which I think Stephen Jones actually edited from memory. And there were people in Sydney being quite supportive. And there was also, I remembered at the time, Albie Toms, who was a very important avant-garde filmmaker. He came to Brisbane quite regularly to help us out. I was the president of the Brisbane Independent Filmmakers, at the time, and so that was really valuable, having people come and share their expertise as well. And the Cantrills, Arthur and Corinne, experimental filmmakers. So, you know, I've got to pay homage as well to those people from Sydney and Melbourne who did, you know, try to cross the borders and not come up here to steal our sunshine. But anyway, that was Joe's favourite phrase. People coming up here is stealing our sunshine. I remember. That was the debate about daylight saving. Yes, so all right, prompt me with another one because I've forgotten where I was up to.
Oh, well, so there was the recut of the film.
It wasn't recut. It wasn't recut.
Sorry.
It was just zhuzhed up with video effects. It wasn't the cut. Oh, I forgot the editor. Trevor Ellis was the editor. It was edited. Here's a nice little anecdote. It was edited in northern New South Wales on a Steenbeck in the people who made Earth First, the Gaia films. Jenny Kendall, her home had a Steenbeck with a tree growing up through the middle of because they didn't want to cut the tree down, so they built around the tree. It's fantastic. But yeah, so it always relied on independent filmmakers who wanted to contribute. So we used their Steenbeck, and it was cut by Trevor, and not recut, but zhuzhed, you know, little funny video effects. That was all, just so we could get into the competition.
And other bits of trivia. I think I remember asking you and getting confirmation that's you in the coffee shop scene. Is that right?
Yes, isn't that funny? And again, that was because, you know, there wasn't any notion. I mean, Ross has sent us a nice little approval thing we have to sign. Nothing like that in those days. And Chris just said, I can't just go in and film those people. You have to sit there and drink, and then I can film you and all those people around you. And that was the California Cafe, which used to be in Valley. It was where we always went to have early morning breakfasts after big late nights. And just again, another bit of trivia, pouring out it's not tea, it's coffee. That was the height of sophistication. I was drinking coffee made on milk. Yes, I know, it seems odd to think so now. But it was a very sophisticated thing to do at the time, very European.
It's such a beautiful cafe. That's one like the Chanel that felt like it lasted long enough that it would be saved. I mean, that was around even into the 90s, I think, that cafe. So yeah, it's so beautiful. And yeah, the Chanel, it spent most of its life battling to keep its existence. You would think that, yeah, there's so many things you think would be heritage protected by now, especially given our past and the lessons we're supposed to have learned. You would assume that they're safe having made it through, but no, they've made it through just to come under threat again.
Yeah, I know, that was sad. Thing. Yes. So what else? Ask me another question.
Did you have any other collaborations with any of the other people involved in the exhibition, or is any of your other work Brisbane specific protests that you'd like to talk about?
No, and in fact, I don't. It's interesting, and it's interesting reflection for you to describe me as a protest filmmaker, because I never really. It was a piece of art. It was me saying, I love this city, and I don't understand why this horrible person is doing this, so stupid, and why he's got so much power to destroy what I love. So I've never thought of myself as a protest filmmaker. I certainly went on the streets. I was an activist in that regard, but my films, unlike the other two, that City for Sale and The City is Dead, they were made by friends of mine at the time. And they're much more clearly protest films, but mine is much more of an art film for me, about a particular socio-historical moment in time, but I didn't really make protest films.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made films about, you know, big issues like Indigenous soldiers in World War II not being recognised, you know, but I don't think of them as protest films. I think they're more as, you know, ways of telling stories.
Are there any questions I haven't thought to ask you? Or anything you'd like to go into?
I don't think so. I'm just going through all my notes. I suppose it just, of course, the one place that we haven't, my third home, the other place that we haven't mentioned is 4ZZZ, of course, which was just an absolute beacon of a place for people to, that was given the license in 1975 by Moss Cass. So for the late 70s, early 80s, that was just a godsend of a place, because it was also a place that, because it was a university campus, police couldn't go there. So it was an absolute, oasis. So, you know, in terms of trying to, if you're trying to have a mental map of what existed in Brisbane at that time and what were the places of, you know, the fountains of inspiration, that would have to be on the list, I think. And that's the other thing I was going to mention is the caption, reasons to be cheerful, because of course that's Ian Dury's Blockheads, which goes back to, you know, the reasons to be cheerful are 3, 1, 2, 3, because that goes back to what I was saying earlier about there was a much stronger sense of confluence between Brisbane and the London punks fighting against Thatcher than there was between anybody else in Australia or overseas. That was a sort of an imaginative home for us.
We were so far ahead of the times in really bad ways. It took America till now to get someone like Joe.
Yes, I know. And you'd think we'd have learnt the lessons, and I won't go into it now because it's 10 o'clock and I'll get cranky, but boy, how disappointing has this Labor government been?
Enough to not be as bad as the alternative.
Well, yeah.
So
I'm in the centre of. I live next to South City Square, and we've had that huge, you know, 30-story uni lodge. You know, so I'm right in the heart of development here in the city. So my blood pressure goes up every time I walk out the door.
Yeah, still a lot of cranes on the skyline. Well, some of the good things that have stayed on, of course, are your film. So, which is part of the exhibition, which the people, as you mentioned, can still see it at the State Library of Queensland. They can see it from the comfort of their self-isolation at home. It's accession number 31304. I highly recommend watching it. It's such a just a beautiful time capsule of what was, tempered with ominous foreboding of what was coming, with those wide shots in the background, and those the cityscape was so tiny. It was such a small town even then, but you could see what was coming.
Yeah, but yes, an homage to the beauty of Brisbane that once was.
Yeah. I'll round up my end of things by thanking Griffith for having me on, for thanking Deb for talking to me, and for making that film, which you can see if you visit the State Library of Queensland's website and search for Expo Smexpo or accession number 31304.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.